G'day folks, and welcome to Wise Guy History's Honourable Mentions. In compiling my top 10 games of all time, there were quite a few games that fell agonisingly short of my top 10, and I really wanted to talk about them in that video, but I thought I'd reserve that space for that top 10 and dedicate a separate video to those Honourable Mentions. Now, these are not listed in sort of order of preference. Rather, I've kind of prioritised games that I feel are worthy of note. And I've picked sort of my top 10 honourable mentions that didn't make my top 10 games of all time. The very first game that I want to mention is Close Action, which was published by Clash of Arms Games. This is early 19th, late 18th century naval warfare simulation, Napoleonic naval warfare. I had one of the best gaming experiences of my life playing a massive team-based game of Close Action. About 12, 13 maybe years ago, living in Sydney, attended a game gathering, and we had probably 16 players, so we had about 2 teams of 8. I'd never played this game before. I was given command of a single ship. I'd read up on the rules. I had my ship, my crew, my guns, and we had a pre-battle meeting with our admiral, who gave us all instructions basically to follow the line and stay in formation. Basically, we were let loose on the enemy. From memory, I commanded a British ship. I could not tell you the name of it, and we let the battle unfold. And yeah, throughout the course of that day, my single ship, my proudest memory of that day was never fouling my ship. I never collided with anyone else. I did a little bit of damage, which was nice. I survived. My ship didn't get sunk, but it was just amazing. A wonderful simulation of Napoleonic era naval warfare. You can't talk to your teammates. 7 other people on my team, we couldn't talk about our strategies and tactics and what we're doing. It's all programmed secretly. You give your orders to the crew on your ship and you let it happen. You can send brief, sort of from memory, 3-word signals to neighbouring ships, which doesn't let you communicate too much. Things like, I'm turning left, or stuff like that. But yeah, a wonderful experience, and Close Action is a remarkable game. At the same time, I've had some pretty poor experiences with scenarios in Close Action. We had one, probably the last game that I played of Close Action, where I was commanding a ship as part of a broader fleet, and we were chasing, I think, a Spanish fleet, and they were just too fast for us, and nothing happened over the course of this very long scenario. So it could be a bit hit and miss, really depending on the scenario. Works better with good, big scenarios and large teams, but certainly a wonderful game experience, Close Action. My second honourable mention has quite a few caveats. It is a game called Triumph of Chaos, designed by David Doctor and published also by Clash of Arms Games. It is a card-driven game focused on the Russian Civil War. It is a very big, very heavy, very complex, very long game. It runs for, if you play through the full game, it runs for about 2 whole days. You're looking at 16, maybe plus hours, unless the game ends earlier, which is certainly a possibility. This is a very heavy game. There's a rulebook and then a supplementary rulebook, but you're looking at dozens and dozens of pages of rules. Good luck remembering all of this. A lot of the political rules in particular you have to look up as you go. There is a lot of errata. The game continues to develop. There have been 2 editions of the game. I bought the first edition when it first came out many years ago and loved it, was fascinated by it. I bought the second edition very quickly when it came out. And yeah, it is again one of my favourite games, but a lot of errata, a lot of rules checking, a lot of uncertainty, but if you can get through all that, if you can grind through the errata and the problems with rules and clarity and clarification, there's just a wonderfully rich experience below that. Very chaotic, very dynamic. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of tension all over. It's a very big map. So a very large sort of theatre of operations from Poland and Finland, down to sort of the Crimean region, the Black Sea, out to the Far East. So activity going on all over the place. Card-driven games, so you're playing these cards. There's a wonderful political phase where you're playing cards to influence politics, which brings in these neutral powers into the war to perhaps fight with you or against you. So just a lot going on in a very complex game. But yeah, if you can get past it, it's a wonderful experience. The third honourable mention is a Euro game. It is a moderate to heavy, leaning kind of the heavy end of the moderate scale complexity Euro game called A Feast for Odin by Uwe Rosenberg. This is Uwe is a wonderful designer, created Caverna and Agricola and many others, and this is, like many of his other games, a worker placement game where you are managing a clan of Vikings, I guess we could say. You place your workers to gather food, you explore distant islands. There are, from memory, about 70 to 80 different actions you can select from. So imagine a worker placement game like Cooper Island, where you've got 8 actions. In A Feast for Odin, you have about 70 to 80 different actions to select from. It's that wonderful choice of action that I love about this game. There's so many different things you can do. Some actions on certain terms are more important than others, and there's a bit of competition between players, but you usually have sort of a backup action. With 70 actions to choose from, if someone picks the action you really want to do, unlucky, but there are still 69 other actions you can pick from, or thereabouts. I don't think, no, it's exactly 70. But this game, because there are so many different actions, there are so many different paths to pursue. You can do so many things. You can go whaling, you can go hunting, you can go fishing for fish, you can go raiding or settling far off lands, you can build ships and longhouses and sheds, you can discover land, and all the while you're collecting these resources, and you'll put these resources, so there's all these sort of worker action roles to play, but then as you gather these resources, you place these on your terrain to kind of look to get bonus resources and negate negative victory points. It's all a victory point game, so you're looking for victory points throughout this, but just that breadth of action choice makes this a really wonderful experience. And every time I play A Feast for Odin, it's a little bit different every time, and you're playing with different people and you're making different choices. In one game, you kind of might be driven towards a whaling strategy. In another game, you might be driven towards an expedition strategy, or you might blend these together. Just a lot of choices in this game, and yeah, some really fascinating decisions to make. The fourth game that narrowly missed out is Caesar, Rome vs. Gaul by Mark Simonich. Again, a wonderful Mark Simonich design, successor in a sense to Hannibal, Rome vs. Carthage, and ironically similar to successors in a way. It is card-driven, point-to-point movement. If you've played Hannibal, Rome vs. Carthage, this is very similar. I did a review of Caesar, Rome vs. Gaul on the channel. You can check that out. Wonderfully dynamic and highly replayable. One of the main reasons this fell outside the top 10 was because of the difficulty we have had winning as the Romans. The Romans have won one game in our many playthroughs at this. It's a much more difficult strategy to wrap your head around. The Romans really need to be really aggressive and push deep and attack the Gauls, and it's difficult to maintain that whilst doing so many different things. So it just fell outside, but look, an outstanding game, a wonderful game experience, very fun and rewarding and open in terms of the choices you're making here. That is Caesar, Rome vs. Gaul, Mark Simonich, and GMT Games. The fifth game on my list of honourable mentions is a very popular game all around. It is Gloomhaven. And I've had this for a number of years. My wife and I have played it. We've introduced friends with it to it. I have played it with the kids. Very, very replayable. A wonderfully cooperative experience. You are playing as a hero on a dungeon that evolves against a very clever AI system. So I mentioned Kingdom Death Monster in my top 10. Gloomhaven is very similar in a way. You kind of have an AI deck which drives the enemy monster's actions. It doesn't quite have that campaign building element. It has a campaign, but not the sort of settlement building element that I loved about Kingdom Death. In Kingdom Death, the thing I loved about that was that you're building your settlement. Gloomhaven, you're kind of building up the community, but not to the same degree. Instead, you're focused on role playing and building up your character's skills. You focus more on the character as an individual until they retire. There's combat. You buy and equip weapons. It's card-driven combat, so you'll select a card to play from your deck, and that will determine your movement, your attack, healing, things like that. You can have close range and range combat, and you'll employ a cooperative set of tactics with your friends to defeat the enemy and counter their actions. There's a wonderful initiative system, which is you play a card and it has an initiative number on it, and that determines who goes first. But that's secret. You don't really know who is going to go first. So there's a bit of chaos and kind of conflict built into that system. That is Gloomhaven. It's long been at the top of Board Game Geek's ratings. My sixth honourable mention is the first title from the coin series to appear here. It's probably my favourite coin, and it's the only two-player coin game thus far, and that is Colonial Twilight, of course published by GMT Games. Why am I rating this as my top coin game? I think this Colonial Twilight is a wonderful two-player game, and I think it works best out of all the coin games. That direct back and forth, you are directly responding to an opponent. So there's kind of less chaos, less bad lucks of the draw that you sometimes can get in the larger coin games. It's a more direct challenge to your opponent. When you've got four players, sometimes there's a lot of chaos. Sometimes you'll be inactive and unable to act, or you won't be able to do much on your action. But that's all removed with Colonial Twilight. You are active every turn. You're always doing things. You're much more highly engaged, and you have far more control over the board situation. So for me, it's my favourite coin game. It's probably the most different coin game, and it deserves an honourable mention for me. My seventh honourable mention is another Euro game. It is Spirit Island, which is just over my shoulder here. This is another one of the best cooperative games. It is probably the most the game that is most in need of cooperative spirit among the players. You can. It's a cooperative game. You're playing against the AI system, but to win this game, you truly need to work very closely. It's constant communication in this game. You can't have one player doing their own thing. My wife and I have played this a lot, and it facilitates a regular discussion and planning together. You basically, in Spirit Island, control a god on an island that has been invaded by European settlers. And as that god, you might be the god of the earth. You need to wreak havoc on these settlers and force them off the island. And you will have a specific list of actions available to you. My wife might be playing the god of fire, and she has lists of actions. And so we need to coordinate our actions. I might be able to move the settlers into a forest region. She might be able to burn a forest region. So I'll say to her, okay, I'll create a landslide to direct these settlers into this space where you can then bring your fire and burn them to kill the invaders, basically. And so it is you're kind of looking at what you're doing, you're talking about what you might be able to do. You've got resources, so you're kind of trying to manage those resources and your actions, and look at the board situation. The settlers expand, they build these towns and cities, and they become more powerful, and you've got to bring these all down. You're constantly kind of waging this war against the settlers and trying to win back your island. But you are doing that cooperatively, not just you versus the settlers, it is the team. And if you have just sort of one person not cooperating, it's a tough game, and you need to work closely to get this job done. That's a wonderful experience, a wonderful game. Spirit Island, there are several expansions for it as well, which add sort of new gods and new features as well. My next honourable mention is, and I mentioned it in my top 10, it is Bonaparte at Morengo by Rachel Simmons Games. It was the original title in sort of this series. It's a little bit different to Napoleon's Triumph. I rate it very highly, but not quite as high as Napoleon's Triumph. Whereas Napoleon's Triumph really is focused on sort of the core of these battles and these large armies coming together. Morengo feels more of a sort of manoeuvring of forces. You'll often sort of feint with one army and then maneuver around to try to outflank your enemy. So you're often trying to displace them from certain areas rather than have this full-on frontal engagement. It just feels like a bit of a different game. As I said in my top 10 video, more chess-like, where you're sort of playing out a larger strategy with the maneuver of your forces. For some, they may be more interested in Morengo because of that reason. You're often looking to uncover information via a feint and then sort of move in with your cavalry to destroy your opponent. Whereas Napoleon's Triumph feels more of a big battlefield grind. It's certainly a bigger game. My next honourable mention, actually I've got two, I'm going to link these two together. Two more Vital Lacerda games. I mentioned how much I admire Vital Lacerda's designs, how I have a big shelf of Vital Lacerda games. These two games very narrowly were displaced from my top 10, but they are certainly worthy. All his games really deserve an honourable mention, but two in particular. They are CO2 Second Chance and On Mars. They are my two other favourite Lacerda games. CO2 Second Chance, you can play it in different ways. You can play it competitively or cooperatively. I've never played it competitively from memory. I've played a lot of co-op games, and I've played a heck of a lot of solo games. This is a wonderful solo experience where you are, in CO2, you play as sort of a nation on Earth trying to reduce emissions in the atmosphere. And you do that by, what do you do? There's several steps to this. You propose the infrastructure for a new green power plant, and it can be things like wind power, solar power, recycled power, things like that. You then develop the infrastructure. The next step is to develop the infrastructure for this power plant, and the third step is to develop that power plant. And you do these steps in various continents around the world. Continents have energy needs, and you need to meet the energy needs of that nation. You need to reduce the CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, and you might need to meet special sort of United Nations global objectives. Like Africa might really want wind power, so you've got to build a wind power plant in Africa, and all these things. So the solo game is very similar to the cooperative game. The competitive game basically does the same thing, but you're competing for victory points by doing these various things. In the solo, in all games, basically, you are trying to survive. And if the Earth heats up too much, it becomes inhospitable, and you lose the game. So you're building these power plants, you're managing emissions, you're managing sort of all these different types of resources and goals and objectives, and there's so much going on, and it's a wonderful experience. On Mars, typical Lacerda heavy complexity Euro game. You are settling Mars and developing Mars, and you have sort of an off-planet area with various actions, and you can then travel to Mars, where you then have on-planet actions. And once you're done on Mars, you travel back off-planet and you collect more resources and sort of prepare yourself, and you travel back down to Mars. You've got your little Mars rovers, which can travel around and collect resources. It's another wonderful resource management game where you're sort of building your facilities on Mars, you're traveling around. There's a bit of a worker placement element. Lots going on, but yeah, On Mars also has several expansions, which I don't have and haven't played with yet, but I find the base game very satisfying and very rewarding, with lots of choices open to you. So they are my honourable mentions. These are games that fell very close to my top 10. We might even call them my top games that are sort of inside my top 20, from 11 to 21, I think I've mentioned now. Certainly worth paying attention to, certainly worth looking at. They offer so many different experiences and choices for players, a mix of cooperative and competitive. In particular, a lot of my honourable mentions feature cooperative games. It's well worth checking those out. A lot of these cooperative games work really well for solo play. Things like Gloomhaven, Spirit Island, and pretty much all the Vital Lacerda games, but CO2 in particular. I've played that many times solo. I haven't played On Mars solo. I've only played that with friends. It's a wonderful multiplayer experience. Whereas games like Close Action, not great. Solitaire, not great with small numbers of people. Best with a large gathering of folks. So again, folks, I hope that's been of interest. I hope this has shed light on some really fascinating games that are well worth checking out. A lot of these are underrated or not well known. Check them out. And again, thanks for watching. Take care.